By the end of the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire extended from England to Egypt and from Portugal to Persia. As many as 50 million people of every race and language were loyal subjects of one emperor. That emperor was always an Italian until 98 AD, when an outsider emerged to take over the empire. His name was Trajan, an ambitious warrior from the province of Spain, whose battlefield triumphs had caught the eye of the ailing emperor Nerva. Having no sons of his own, Nerva adopted Trajan as his son and heir.
There is a widening of the idea of what it meant to be Roman and who could help the state and who would participate in the state. And Trajan is a very good example of that. Trajan is the first of a whole series of emperors who come from outside of Italy.
When Nerva died, Trajan inherited the Roman world. He immediately set out to prove his loyalty to the citizens of the capital. He knew the best way to do this was to appeal to their unyielding sense of supremacy.
The Romans thought on a grand scale. The size of their empire, the size of their buildings, and the ambitions of its leading individuals must be one of the things that we point to as defining what it meant to be a Roman. They were driven by a kind of collective cultural ego.
Trajan launched a massive building campaign that began with the empire's infrastructure. He made urgently needed repairs on roads, harbors, and public buildings. He commissioned one of the last great aqueducts and built new public baths on the crumbling foundations of Nero's Golden House.
All of this building required a tremendous amount of money. And in order to really complete and fulfill his own kind of plans, he was going to have to come up with a great deal more of it. And in Roman terms, this means conquest.
In his 3rd year as emperor, Trajan launched a military offensive to raise revenue for the construction of more magnificent monuments. He set out to conquer Dacia, an elusive region encompassing modern Romania and Hungary that had fended off the Romans for centuries. After years of bitter combat, the Dacians surrendered in 107 AD. The conquering emperor plundered hundreds of tons of gold and silver from his new province.
Trajan is the emperor that extended the boundaries of the empire to its greatest extent. So Trajan really pushed the envelope, and in doing so, he brought back more money, more goods, more spoils than any other emperor, which meant that he had so much money at his disposal.
The emperor spent his new capital on a sprawling public space that would alleviate the congestion in Rome's overcrowded downtown district. Since the beginning of the Republic, the old Roman Forum had been the center of government, commerce, and culture. There, temples to gods like Saturn and Vesta sat beside law courts and libraries. But as Rome grew into the capital of the world, development began to sprawl out from its original crossroads.
The Forum was a critical part of Roman life, but the success of the city and the pressure of the population was such that they had to keep building new extensions time after time. And each emperor in turn had to build a new part of the Forum for their own people.
By the time of Trajan, Rome was a densely populated metropolis of 1 million people and growing. So he commissioned his own new Forum, one larger than those of all his predecessors combined.
Trajan didn't just have so much money, but the skills of the engineers, the people who poured concrete and so on, they were at a height. They could achieve and create better and faster than any previous time.
The finished product was unveiled in 112 AD. Trajan's Forum was a magnificent marble network of Greek and Latin libraries, colossal statues, an enormous central piazza, and a two-story basilica where laws were made and cases tried.
To go to the Forum of Trajan would have been a massive experience for any Roman. You would have entered the basilica, the largest ever built in Rome, of that type. The basilica was revetted with marble, flooded with light. After that, you would have arrived in the square. You would have looked around and seen the monumental equestrian statue of Trajan. It really must have been an awesome sight.
The Forum's centerpiece was a 125-foot marble column that towered above the new construction. That column still survives today. Around its facade, a spiraling relief is carved that tells the story of Trajan's invasion of Dacia.
Trajan appears over and over and over and over again, always involved in every aspect of the campaign, from its initial planning all the way through final conquest. And in this way, the column serves as a kind of propaganda film.
The column's exact height holds a more subtle significance.
The height of Trajan's column itself, 100 feet, with the addition of the base and a statue on top of that, marked the height of the side of the Quirinal Hill, which was removed to create the Forum at that spot. Therefore, it becomes a marker not only of the battles of Trajan, but also the battles of Apollodorus to clear the land and create this monumental urban space.
Trajan's Forum stood for 700 years. Most of it was reduced to rubble by a 9th century earthquake. But there is one surviving section that leaves no doubt about its imposing scale, a vast complex known as Trajan's Market. Apollodorus shored up the 125-foot cliff face he had created by form-fitting a 6-story Roman shopping mall directly into the hillside. He ingeniously shaped the first 3 levels in a hemicycle, a semicircular structure with long, curved corridors of storefronts.
The markets function to reinforce the hillside, which had just been carved out. And it's probably not by chance that the form that's used against that hillside is concave, therefore a much stronger form, again, the form of an arch turned on its side to resist the pressure of the hill beside that.
Above the hemicycle were 3 more levels, with units ranging from small shops to great 3-storied halls. Trajan's Market contained over 150 individual storefronts that might have supplied everything from footwear to fine art.
These markets must have sold enormous quantities of materials from all parts of the Roman world, and perhaps even beyond.
While Trajan's Forum next door was a lavish haven for the city's elite, his market was engineered as a main street for the masses.
The market, together with the Forum, represent 2 sides of Roman culture. The opulence of the Forum, its colonnaded forecourt, its gilded decorations, represented a tremendous formal center for the city. Right next to that, the brick architecture of the marketplace, very commonplace in the city for the daily lives of the Roman citizenry.
Trajan's engineering feats at home and conquests abroad made him one of the most popular emperors in Roman history. By the end of his reign in 117 AD, the empire had reached its greatest size, stretching across the Middle East to the Persian Gulf. Trajan had no biological sons, so upon his death, control of the empire passed to his adoptive son, Hadrian.
Hadrian, like Trajan, was a military man and an accomplished one. Hadrian saw that the empire would be unable to maintain its expanded borders. The longer the borders are extended, of course, the more money it takes to be able to maintain border defenses. So he wasn't looking for more things to conquer, but how to hold on to what they already had.
Concrete evidence of Hadrian's defensive policy shift can be found today in a remote section of northern England, 1,500 miles from Rome. When Hadrian came to power in 117, the northern half of Britannia remained an untamed frontier, where Roman soldiers confronted the dual threats of freezing winters and barbarian incursion. Hadrian put his legions to work on the most ambitious fortification ever conceived by a Roman. A towering 73-mile defensive wall across the entire country. Today, the pilfering of time has reduced Hadrian's wall to its foundations. But it once towered 15 feet high, with parapets rising an additional 6 feet above that. A 9-foot ditch was dug at its base, forcing potential invaders to make a 30-foot climb before coming face to face with the Roman legions on the other side. And if invaders did miraculously make it over the wall and past the Roman guards, they had one last obstacle to slow their advance: the Vallum, a 120-foot wide ditch that ran behind the wall from coast to coast. Hadrian's wall was as much a psychological barrier as a physical one. Its monstrous, unending facade served as an unnerving reminder of Rome's indisputable dominance. In just 5 years, Hadrian's vast barrier across Britain was complete. The emperor had secured Rome's northwest border, improved discipline within his ranks, and created an unmistakable testament to the vast reach of Roman power. 150 years earlier, Emperor Augustus had famously transformed Rome from a city of brick into a city of marble. Hadrian wanted his own building legacy to be equally memorable, and the crown jewel in that legacy would have a direct link to the reign of his legendary predecessor. Soon after he became emperor, he set his sights on rebuilding a burned-out temple complex dating from the time of Augustus. In the rubble of the old ruin, he commissioned his most famous structure, the Pantheon, a majestic temple to the Roman gods.
The Pantheon is arguably the most amazing structure ever built by the Romans. Why? The Rotunda.
The Rotunda, a huge interior space capped by a magnificent dome ceiling, was the heart of the Pantheon's design. At its center, the concrete dome rises nearly 150 feet. It spans exactly the same length across without any support from columns or buttresses.
150 feet is a great distance to span. And the guts that they had to attempt something so wide, to span something so wide, this is one of the grand achievements.
The Pantheon's dome would remain the largest unsupported concrete span in the world for 18 centuries. Before Hadrian's engineers could start pouring the dome's concrete ceiling, they needed to figure out how to direct its weight away from its center. Otherwise, when they removed the wooden framework holding the ceiling in place, 3,000 tons of concrete would collapse under its own weight.
Today, when we build in concrete, we introduce a steel tension rod, which picks up half of the stresses in the concrete. The Romans couldn't do this. Therefore, the dome of the Pantheon was constantly pushing outward towards its base.
The Pantheon's engineers developed several radical solutions to make sure its ceiling and the emperor's reputation wouldn't come crashing down. First, they built a solid base of walls 20 feet thick to act as a foundation for the ceiling.
They used the vertical walls on either side to help support the weight of the dome from pushing outwards. They used the walls to buttress the dome itself.
Next, as the ceiling rose toward its apex, they mixed in lighter materials with the cement and poured a progressively thinner layer of it.
Roman concrete, like concrete today, used aggregate, usually stones, to bond the concrete together. In the Pantheon's dome, Romans used a common technique at that time of actually inserting hollow amphora or jugs inside of the concrete to displace some of the concrete and lighten the load.
To make the ceiling even lighter, the builders molded recessed panels called coffers into the ceiling, which served two ingenious purposes.
These coffers are meant, obviously, for an aesthetic purpose. That is, that they allow the surface of the domed area to be decorated. But at the same time, they reduce the amount of concrete which is necessary for the dome itself.
A final weight-shedding alteration immediately became the Pantheon's most distinctive feature: the oculus, a 30-foot wide hole in the center of the ceiling. The oculus eliminates the stress of heavy concrete at the dome's weakest point, and it lights up the interior like the sun does the earth.
Imagine as an ancient, never having been in this kind of interior space before, because no other interior space had ever looked like it before, feeling the religious aspect of the interior itself. A building which was dedicated to all the gods.
The Pantheon's engineers strove for perfection and almost achieved it. But there is one mysterious flaw in the design that still baffles modern observers. The Pantheon's front portico, the colonnaded gateway to the interior, is about 10 feet too short. It doesn't connect with the rotunda where it should.
Why 50-foot columns were not used instead of the 40s that were there can only be held to speculation at this point. Did they sink in the Mediterranean? Were the Romans not able to acquire the stone to achieve those kind of columns in the time necessary for Hadrian to inaugurate the building? We can't say for sure.
For centuries, the Pantheon has stood as a confounding engineering enigma. But the way it was built is just part of the puzzle. The bigger mystery is who designed it. There are no surviving records to reveal the architect's identity. But modern speculation centers on Emperor Hadrian himself.
He was a very versatile individual and painted and wrote poetry and loved architecture. So many of Hadrian's other buildings were domes. So it seems to me that Hadrian may have had a hand in the design.
In the decades following Hadrian's death, the Roman Empire remained the dominant force in Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its emperors maintained absolute authority. Its armies remained invincible, and its architects continued to inspire jaw-dropping awe. For centuries, baths had been an integral part of daily life in Rome. They centered around an arrangement of hot and cold pools. But the baths were more than just a place to bathe. They were country clubs open to people of every class.
After you finished work, you're going to go to the baths for a couple of hours to unwind, to listen to politics, to get a rub down, to have a manicure, to have a haircut. There were places to work out. You could wrestle. And then, of course, you could go to the baths themselves and go to the hot rooms, sweat a lot. And you were surrounded by magnificent structures that were sheathed in marble and decorated with statues. And they were for the benefit of the average person. This was not just a structure for the rich. This was for the average Roman citizen.
Baths had always been a popular construction project among Roman emperors. The buildings seen above ground were just half of the story. Beneath the complex, a water channel tunneled from a nearby aqueduct diverted 5 million gallons of fresh water into the baths every day. Water for the hot pools was diverted to furnaces, where it was heated over wood fires. As many as 50 such furnaces were built directly beneath the floor.
This floor literally divided the world of the wealthy and successful Roman citizen from the underworld of slaves and laborers who were toiling away in furnace-like conditions, stoking fires and choked with smoke and fumes and so on. Up here in these beautifully decorated chambers with marbles and mosaics and decorated tiled ceilings, it must have seemed like paradise.
Over the next 3 centuries, the empire that had once burned so brightly slowly burned out. The theories as to why fill volumes.
Some people say it is the metallurgy that poisoned them. Some people say it is the decadence and the inbreeding in the upper class. Some people say it is the lack of a trained army and subsequently no defense.
I think the Roman Empire was simply too large to be governed effectively, to be administered, and to create any kind of real sense of community.
In the 5th and 6th centuries, Germanic warrior tribes repeatedly sacked Rome, demanding land and money. In 537, an invading tribe went right for the jugular, destroying the city's most vital life-sustaining arteries, its aqueducts. Without the running water its citizens had come to rely on, the once great capital crumbled.
People without water couldn't live in the city center. The gardens and farmlands could not be watered. The population of 1.2 million people quickly dwindled to 12,000. That's a 99% decrease.
1,500 years after the fall of Rome, its engineering legacy still inspires and confounds modern builders.
So many of the things that the Romans were able to do in their time, we were not able to do again until we developed new technologies. We wouldn't be able to accomplish a dome like the Pantheon without the use of a computer, certainly. We wouldn't be able to move a hillside without mechanized equipment. Given their tools, we would never be able to accomplish those same things.
Maybe the most important lesson the Romans taught us is one that Julius Caesar, Nero, and Caracalla never understood. That the same blind ambition that drives our progress can also bring about our demise.
These people lived out their ambitions and their kind of appetites in such a way that we both admire them and kind of abhor them at the same time.
The ancient Romans were often violent, vindictive, greedy, and egocentric. But the imposing structures they left behind stand as evidence not only of the power of one civilization, but of the unlimited potential of humankind.